With the sunset staining the horizon red after a day marked by the battle near the Kalka River, the Mongols faced the defenders of the most important Russian cities. At the heart of the conflict, a group of Russian hunters, including two fathers with their sons, entered a dense forest. Within this group, Nastia stood out, a young woman with a deep love for the music of her flute, and Kobat, who aspired to become a royal guard and a legendary warrior. The tranquility of their journey was suddenly interrupted by a surprise attack by Mongol warriors under the command of Commander Kostu. During the chaos, Nastia left her flute behind and with firm resolve galloped towards the nearest town. She wasn't looking for help, but to warn others of the imminent danger. Kobat, armed with two swords, faced Kostu, but was quickly defeated and taken prisoner. 14 years later, Kobat, now a grown man, awoke tied to a bed, his memory clouded by time. Beside him, a now adult Nastia offered him comfort as she recounted their shared history, a story filled with suffering and resilience. Contrary to what his Mongol enemies expected, Kobat had not only survived, but had risen to become the chief of the royal guard, marrying Nastia and fathering two children. As Kobat lost himself in his thoughts, his reflection was interrupted by Karen, a comrade in arms. Together, they headed to the city fortifications to meet with Prince Yuri of Ryazan, who was anxious to obtain details about an approaching group of riders whose loyalty was dubious. With his usual prudence, Kobat proposed waiting and observing before taking any action. This precaution proved correct when they discovered that the riders were allies coming for the baptism of Yuri's grandson. In his role as leader, Kobat took charge of training the local warriors and, honoring tradition and camaraderie, agreed to be the godfather at the baptism of the son of Fedor, Yuri's son. After the ceremony, he challenged Fedor to demonstrate his skill in combat, thus strengthening their bond and solidifying his status as a leader and mentor in the community. The duel between Kobat and Fedor did not go as the latter expected, culminating in a humiliating retreat after being clearly defeated. After this event, Kobat, bringing gifts to his family, surprised his children with an unusual hedgehog and gave Nastia a handmade flute. Upon placing it next to the others, a series of identical flutes was discovered, evidencing Kobat's tendency to repeat gifts due to his frequent forgetfulness. The calm was abruptly broken by the alarming news of an impending Mongol attack. Despite the fear beginning to spread, Kobat remained serene, ensuring along with the baby that the priest completed the blessing ceremony. Faced with the imminent threat of the powerful Mongol army, Yuri and his council reacted swiftly, closing the city gates and preparing to withstand the siege on their own. At the dawn of a critical day, Yuri gathered his council to debate how to face the imminent threat. Fedor, with tireless spirit, advocated confronting the Mongols despite being outnumbered. In contrast, other more cautious advisors suggested paying a tribute in exchange for protection, even if it meant impoverishing themselves while waiting for reinforcements. Faced with the growing tension, Yuri appointed Fedor to lead a diplomatic mission in an attempt to negotiate with the Mongols. Meanwhile, Kobat, witnessing the unrest in the city, met with Sakar, a healer who requested permission to leave in exchange for offering his medical services. Kobat, with perspective, explained the futility of trying to flee from the approaching Mongol siege. In a surprising turn of events, Yuri appointed Kobat to accompany Fedor in the dialogue with the Mongols. Kobat, despite his initial reluctance, motivated by occasional memory lapses and Nasa's disapproval, had Yuri's full support. During the preparations for the trip, Kobat chose Sakar as his interpreter, thanks to his fluency in Mongolian. Given Nasa's concern for Kobat, it was decided that El, who was in charge of his morning care, would also be part of the expedition. Thus began their journey to the Mongol camp, carrying valuable gifts to offer to Batu Khan, a descendant of Genghis Khan, who welcomed them into his tent. Batu Khan welcomed the offerings and proposed a toast showing curiosity about their purposes. Although he dismissed the idea of an imminent invasion, his fascination with Russian culture led him to consider future control, offering supplies to the Russians who submitted. In a moment of bravery, Fedor challenged Batu Khan to surrender, bordering on a direct confrontation. Just at that crucial moment, Kobat, carefully analyzing Batu Khan's extensive map, intervened to back up Fedor. Emphasizing the resilience of his people, he managed to capture the attention of Batu Khan, who presented him with a protective amulet and a letter that guaranteed the safety of its bearer in hostile territories. However, the atmosphere of the negotiations darkened when Batu Khan, under the guise of a spectacle, initiated a distracting plan to cover up a surprise Mongol attack. The deception was uncovered thanks to the Russian slaves in service, who subtly alerted their compatriots to the imminent danger. In the ensuing chaos, Kobat quickly devised an escape plan, not only freeing the Russian slaves but also bravely confronting a group of Mongol warriors. Although they managed to flee on horseback into the forest, an arrow struck Fedor, who, in a gesture of sacrifice, decided to stay behind to buy time for the others, meeting a heroic death at the hands of the Mongols. Batu Khan decided not to pursue the fleeing group, choosing instead to concentrate his resources on planning a larger attack. In their escape through the forest, Kobat and his allies faced growing difficulties, exacerbated by a relentless snowstorm. Unexpectedly, they came across a towering bear. Contrary to expectations, the bear was not hostile, as Nestor, another Russian, managed to calm it. He guided the group to a large cave that provided them with essential shelter from the harsh weather. On a clear and quiet night, while his companions rest, Kobat finds himself restless, unable to sleep. He approaches Nestor seeking an elixir that will allow him to stay awake and preserve his memories. Nestor, however, suggests that forgetting daily could be an opportunity to renew himself each day. Although Nestor does not grant what Kobat desires, the latter decides to stay alert and, remembering a map he had seen earlier in Batu Khan's tent, hurries to draw it from memory. When the storm subsides, the group continues their journey, leaving Nestor behind in his refuge. Upon reaching Ryazan, they find a desolate scene. The place has been ransacked by the Mongols, who have destroyed buildings and toppled the town's main bell. Personal tragedies are immediate. Yuri dies from enemy arrows, Fedor's wife throws herself into the void with their son, and Nastia and her children perish in a fire. Amidst the rubble, Kobat finds a flute that he himself had carved earlier. This discovery prompts him to motivate his people to raise the fallen bell and ring it, hoping that survivors will hear the sound and gather. Although most of the survivors are children, this rekindles a renewed hope among them. The tranquility, however, is short-lived, as news soon arrives of an imminent return of the Mongols. Resolute, Kobat devises a cunning plan to deceive the invaders by making them believe that they are surrendering. When the Mongols approach, he and his warriors ambush them with their twin swords, decimating their ranks with a surprise attack. Following the victory, Kobat takes preventive measures to secure the immediate future. He sends messengers to nearby cities requesting support and relocates the children to a safe haven within Nestor's cave. Meanwhile, Kobat and his warriors do not rest in their fight against the Mongols. Inspired by an idea from Sakar, they prepare a potent potion that they secretly mix with the Mongols' water supply, weakening them before the next confrontation. As a declaration of his tactic, Kobat ties a piece of an intercepted letter to an arrow and shoots it directly into the enemy camp, signaling his defiance. Upon intercepting the letter, an enraged Kobru quickly sends a troop in retaliation against Kobat and his companions. However, the Russians, always resourceful and forward-thinking, prepare an ambush for Kobru's troop, achieving a swift and decisive victory. Exhausted after several days without rest, Kobat finally falls asleep, sinking into a deep slumber. Concerned about his condition, his friends promptly set up a makeshift camp and, fearing his memory lapses, decide to tie Kobat to a tree to keep him safe. El, who has been constantly caring for him, secretly hopes that, in time, Kobat might reciprocate her love. As night falls, El wakes Kobat to feed him. In her attempt to help him recover his memory and free him, the situation becomes complicated when Kobat, still confused, fails to recognize his own allies. Meanwhile, two of the messengers that Kobat had sent to neighboring cities return with discouraging news. The princes, prioritizing their own safety, refuse to offer their support. The third messenger suffers an accident and is left unconscious, abandoned to his fate on uncertain roads. Using the darkness of night to their advantage, Kobat and his team execute a daring plan. Disguised in clothes and face paint that give them a spectral appearance, they infiltrate the Mongol camp. Their sudden and ghostly apparition causes terror among the Mongols. Resolutely, they confront the soldiers who try to resist and, with a daring maneuver, take control of the enemy catapults to use them against their own masters, thus exacerbating the chaos and confusion among the enemy ranks. Kobat, in a bold and defiant act, decides to add one more arrow to the message that is to reach Kostov as a sign of revenge. This action results in the Mongols capturing the wayward messenger, whom they subject to rigorous interrogation. With the fall of the sun, the Russian warriors retreat into the forest, awaiting reinforcements at dawn. M, restless from a recent dream, seeks out Kat. She, surprised, tries to disguise her identity, posing as Nastia. However, Kobat, with affection and certainty, refreshes Kat's memory about who she really is and the depth of their shared history. At dawn, an unusual noise guides Kat into the depths of the forest, with El secretly following her. There they discover a terrifying sight: the lifeless body of a third messenger, evidence of a Mongol ambush. Suddenly, surrounded and amidst a fierce snowstorm, Kobat launches into a fierce battle. Kostov, from a safe distance, tries to weaken Kobat by throwing projectiles, recalling previous confrontations. However, Kobat, ever vigilant, blocks the attacks with his sword in the middle of the storm. At that critical moment, Nestor appears with a bear, attacking and disrupting the Mongol ranks, sowing panic and scattering them in a wild tumult. As the Mongols try to regroup, they share terrifying stories of inexplicable phenomena observed during the fighting. Although they are skeptical at first, the imposing figure of Kobot, wielding both the storm and the bear, begins to sow doubts even in Kostov. However, Batu Khan, despising these superstitious beliefs, rebukes his troops and orders a tactical retreat in order to discredit the rumors that are beginning to be woven around the conflict. In the Russian camp, the atmosphere is charged with expectation. Nestor, after freeing the bear, returns and joins Kat's brigade, strengthened by reinforcements from nearby villages. A feeling of jubilation spreads when Karan reveals that the Mongols are following them, just as planned. Following advice from Sakar and modifying the initial strategy, Kobot orders his warriors to establish a defensive perimeter. This allows El and the children to head to the river, where they plan to use the sled's sail to move quickly over the snow, avoiding the mounted pursuers and thus safeguarding their future. With the sled already in motion, the men rush to set traps and position themselves on a hill, ready for the decisive confrontation that is coming with the Mongols. As Batu Khan's imposing army advanced, the Russians quickly organized, deploying a battalion for combat. The first Russian attack was neutralized by cunningly placed traps and the accuracy of the archers. On another front, Heron and his group faced challenges, striving together to pull a sled up the slope. The confrontation intensified as the Mongol archers hit their targets, and after overcoming the defensive barriers on the hill, a fierce hand-to-hand fight broke out. Tragedy struck when Nestor and Sakar were fatally wounded. In the tumult of combat, Kostov of Rule was defeated by Kobot, who skillfully wielded his twin swords. Although outnumbered, the resilience of the Russians allowed Karan and the children to reach the river. There, they encountered the frozen knot of the sail. Ingeniously, Karan instructed the children to blow on the ice to melt it enough to free the sail and ensure their escape. Meanwhile, with the Russian ranks dwindling, Kobot eliminated the remaining Mongols on the hill and, victorious, raised his flag. Batu Khan, frustrated and feeling challenged, sent an emissary to understand the Russians' intentions. Responding to the challenge, Kobot, echoing the words of the Mongol leader, declared his longing for peace, stressing that the Mongols had never been welcome. Consumed by rage, Batu Khan ordered his troops to maneuver the catapults. Amidst the growing tumult, Kobot watched as the sled drifted down the river, feeling a brief respite and confirming that the escape had been successful. But his serenity vanished in seconds when a projectile struck him, rendering him senseless. Upon regaining consciousness, memories of Kat flooded his thoughts. As he opened his eyes, the devastating image of his fallen comrades appeared before him. Armed with courage and protected by a talisman, he began to descend the hill. Despite his weakness, he bravely faced Batu Khan, anticipating that his people would one day seek revenge. Upon returning the talisman to the Mongol leader, Kobot's last words challenged Batu Khan, suggesting that he had somehow managed to subdue him. In his final moments, Kobot expired. His courage deeply touched Batu Khan, who admitted that Kobot would have been his most loyal warrior had he been Mongol. In a gesture of respect for the fallen hero, Batu Khan ordered that he be given a proper burial. 5 years later, Karan took command of the Novorad Vladimir military forces. As he prepared for combat, he harangued his soldiers, reminding them of Kobot's courage. Inspired by his legacy, they advanced towards what would become known as the Battle on the Ice.